You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. On today's episode of the podcast, we review the Test series between Pakistan and Australia. It's the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast, and let's get started. Let's have a look at the series results from this Test series between Pakistan and Australia. The first Test was played at the Rawalpindi Cricket Stadium. The match was drawn and Aman al-Haq was named man of the match. The second Test was at the National Stadium in Karachi. The match was drawn and Babar Azam was named man of the match. The third Test of the series was played at the Gaddafi Stadium at Lahore. Australia won by 115 runs and Pat Cummins was named man of the match. Australia won the series 1-0. And Usman Khawaja was named man of the series. Let's have a look at Pakistan's performance with both bat and ball in this Test series and talk about their performance in this series. We'll start with their batsmen. Shafiq, 397 runs. Azam, 390. Al-Haq, 370. Azhar Ali, 300. Rizwan, 140. Alam, 33. And Ahmed, 13. That's how the Pakistan batsmen went about things in this Test series against Australia. Pakistan will be disappointed to lose this Test series 1-0. After drawing the first two Test matches and batting really well in the second Test to bat out for a draw, they will be disappointed to lose this final Test and not win the series. And they will be disappointed, Pakistan, because they played some good cricket in this series at times with both bat and ball. Unfortunately, those batting collapses that they had in this series pretty much cost them, especially in the last Test where they had that batting collapse in the first innings where they lost 7 for 20. And we'll talk about that a bit later on in the batting performance when we mention batting collapses, but that didn't help their cause in the last Test. But as I said, they batted pretty well in this series. A lot of their batsmen cashed in on these flat surfaces throughout the series. Shafiq, Azam, Al-Haq, Azhar Ali, Rizwan, all cashed in, except for Fawad Alam, who was the only batsman who really missed out from Pakistan, really. He didn't really have much of a contribution in this series. But Pakistan batted very good in the series. They batted very well, I should say. They were able to bat for long periods of time and scoring big totals in this series because the pitches in this series, as I mentioned before, were pretty much flat, good for batting, and they were able to cash in, especially in the first Test match of Rawalpindi. They got 4 for 476 declared, I should say. They batted for 162 overs. And then in the second innings, there were none for 252 in 77 overs. The second Test match, they got bowled out for 148, batting 53 overs. Then in the second innings of the second Test, obviously they batted and they were able to hang on for a draw, finishing on 7 for 443 from 171.4 overs. And then in the third Test match, it started to fall away for Pakistan a bit there. Bowled out for 268 from 116.4 overs in the first innings, and then bowled out for 235 from 92.1 overs in the second innings to pretty much give Australia the series, and Australia won the series 1-0. So they'll be disappointed about that, as I mentioned before, with the batting collapses, and that cost them. But they did bat well, as I said before. They were able to build big partnerships as well throughout the series. The partnerships they had throughout the series were 252 unbeaten for the first wicket. That was between Shafiq and Al-Haq in the first Test at Rawalpindi. 228 for the third wicket between Shafiq and Azam. That was the second Test at Karachi. 208 for the second wicket between Al-Haq and Azhar Ali. That was the first Test at Rawalpindi. 150 for the second wicket between Shafiq and Azhar Ali. That was the third Test at Lahore. 115 for the fifth wicket between Azam and Rizwan. That was the second Test at Karachi. 105 for the first wicket between Shafiq and Al-Haq. That was the first Test at Rawalpindi. 101 for the third wicket between Azhar Ali and Azam. That was the first Test at Rawalpindi. And 77 for the first wicket between Shafiq and Al-Haq. That was the third Test at Lahore. So Pakistan were able to build the big partnerships, and they had 7 100-run partnerships and only 1 50-run partnership. So the conversion rate between 50-run partnerships to 100 were pretty good for Pakistan in this series. They converted, 7 of those partnerships into century partnership stands, which they did. 3 of them were over 200. which was pretty good on their point of view. And they only had one 50-run partnership. So it was a very good conversion rate there in terms of 100-run partnerships and 50-run partnerships, which was very good. So they did bat well in this series, Pakistan. But at times, they had bits of lapses of concentration, which caused batting collapses. And we'll talk about that a bit later. But the other thing that Pakistan did well was that they converted starts. Unlike the Australian team, the only Australian batsman to score centuries for Australia in this series was Usman Khawaja. He was the only one who scored 2. Whereas with Pakistan, they had more than one player score hundreds. Shafiq scored 1. Azam scored 1. Al-Haq scored 2 in back-to-back innings in the first test at Rawalpindi. Azhar Ali scored 1 in Rawalpindi. Mohammad Rizwan in the second innings of the second test at Karachi. So 5 centurions for Pakistan. Compare that to Australia with 1. So what Pakistan did very well was that once their batsmen got starts, they were able to convert those starts into big centuries. And that's something that Australia didn't do in their batting throughout the series. And that's what Pakistan did well than Australia, which is very important because you need your top order and middle order. Some of them, one of them, or a couple of them, or maybe 3 of them to score big centuries. And that's what the Pakistan batsmen did in this series. And I thought that they did that pretty well. Shafiq, 136 not out. Babar Azam, 196. Al-Haq, 157. Azhar Ali, 185. Mohammad Rizwan, 104 not out. So they were able to convert the starts that they got into big centuries. And that was the key for Pakistan with their batting in this series. I did mention they had some batting collapses, and they'll be disappointed about that, Pakistan, with the batting collapses. Especially in the first innings of the second test when they got bowled out for 148 in Karachi. And in the final test at Lahore when they lost 7 for 20 in the first innings to be bowled out for 268 and 235. The collapse of 7 for 20 in the first innings of the third test, they lost their last 5 wickets for less than 5 runs. So 5 for 264, they were bowled out for 268, all out. They'll be disappointed to have those batting collapses. To me, when Australia started to get a bit of a roll on, Australia got the ball to reverse, and Pakistan didn't quite handle that pressure by the Australian bowlers. When they started to get the ball to reverse, they didn't know how to play it. It's very hard to play reverse swing at pace. As we've seen in the last test match with Stark and Cummins, the Pakistan batsmen couldn't handle it because they were bowling good pace, Cummins and Stark, and they were bowling rapid, and they got the ball to reverse. And that's a big advantage for any fast bowler. If you can reverse the ball at pace, you're going to get wickets, and that's what happened. And for the Pakistan batsmen, they weren't able to cope with that pressure or find a way to get through it. And obviously in the last test match, it didn't help for Pakistan because they had a long tail. They went in with the extra bowler and Naseem Shah, and they didn't have the all-rounder in Fahim Ashraf, which could have been handy for them to shorten the tail end. But unfortunately, they went in with the extra fast bowler. I can understand why they did that, because they wanted to be aggressive. Last game of the series, you want to win it. But it was their downfall. And with a long tail, Australia knew once they broke the top order, because Shafiq, Azam, Al-Haq, Azhar Ali, Mohammad Rizwan, not so much Fawad Alam, but once you got through the top order of Pakistan, who were batting really well in this series, as the numbers suggest, and as we see with the numbers and the stats and the way they batted, they were very good. Once you got through the top order, it was quite a long tail, and the likes of, Afridi, Norman Ali, Naseem Shah, Sajid Khan, Hassan Ali, they weren't going to stick around for too long, and that's what happened in the last test. They were just falling over like 9 pins, and Australia just cashed in and got the wickets. So that was Pakistan's downfall. The balance of the side for the third test really cost them. But, they'll be disappointed to have these batting collapses, because throughout the whole series, they batted well. The top order batted well, except for Fawad Alam. But the rest, sort of faltered. So, yeah, very disappointing. What I've noticed from this Pakistan team in this series is their fight and the way they don't give up. I noticed that, especially in the second test in Karachi, where they batted on for a draw. They batted over 170-odd overs to bat for a draw. And no one really gave them a chance to bat out that test match and save it. but they were able to save it. And, by doing that, it just shows what fight that this team has. They have great fight. They have great perseverance. They don't give up. And that's what I noticed from them in this series, especially in that second test match, where they just didn't give up. They just wanted to bat on for a draw, and Babar Azam led that. He was the leader in that, and that's why Pakistan were able to bat for the draw in Karachi. So that's what I've noticed from Pakistan. The greatest strength that this team has is their fight. So that's their greatest asset. Because what we saw in the last innings in Karachi, where they batted for a draw, and at one stage they're nearly going to win the game, but they decided to bat for the draw in the end. They lost a few wickets. Is their fight and their perseverance. So that's what I've noticed from this Pakistan team. Whenever they were behind in the series, they were always prepared to fight and not give up. So that's very good to see from Pakistan. Let's talk about a few of their batsmen. I thought some of their batsmen in this series were very good. Abdullah Shafiq, I thought he was outstanding. He got out cheaply for 44 in the first innings of the first test, but he made up for it after that, scoring his first century in the second innings of the first test. He got 136 not out. And then from then on in, he looked like a serious test player. So he's going to be a very good test player for Pakistan in the future, that's for sure. He's got a lot of potential and a lot of talent. Aman al-Haq, he batted well in the series. Before this test series, didn't have a test century to his name, but scoring back-to-back centuries in the first test really got him going in his test career. Returned to the side after missing out for a few years. He grabbed his opportunity with both hands. After he scored those 2 centuries, he had a bit of a decline in the series, and then he got the 50 in the last test match in the second innings. So he sort of had a bit of a dip in form after the first test, but hopefully for him, this will boost his confidence going forward for his career, and certainly for Pakistan going forward to invest in him as a player. Babar Azam, the captain, was outstanding, wasn't he? The highlight for me was his 196 in Karachi. What an innings that was to bat in that second innings in trying conditions to get the team over the line for a draw was outstanding. He was pure class. No wonder he's one of the best batsmen in the world. Nothing more to say on that, really. Fawad Alam, he was the only Pakistan batsman that was disappointing. He's got a weird, unorthodox technique, as we all know. He sort of bats like Shivran Chanderpaul, in a way. But he got found out by the Australian bowlers with his technique. And he could be in serious doubt to lose his test spot in this Pakistan team. It wasn't a great series from him, averaging 8.25. That's not great. So he was disappointing. And last but not least, Mohammad Rizwan, I thought he batted well in the series. A brilliant century in the second innings at Karachi. He was still playing his shots when Pakistan were looking to defend and block out for a draw. He was just playing his natural game, and that was wonderful to see. I thought he kept well behind the stumps, and he's a quality player. So overall, I think Pakistan will be happy with their batting performance in parts of this series. They'll be disappointed about how they had those batting collapses. So overall, I think they'll be disappointed that they had those batting collapses, but they'll also be happy in the way that they batted well at times in this series, and a lot of their batsmen got runs and got centuries, and hopefully for them, that will boost their confidence going forward in the future in the test side. Let's have a look at Pakistan's performance with the ball in this test series. Afridi took 9 wickets, 9 for Norman Ali, 6 for Shah, 4 for Sajid Khan, 2 for Ashraf, and 2 for Hassan Ali, and 1 for Azam. That's how the Pakistan bowlers went about things in this test series against Australia. I thought Pakistan's bowlers did an okay job with the ball in this series, where the surfaces were pretty flat throughout the series. They were able to take all 10 wickets in the first test at Rawalpindi, where the pitch was really flat, and out-bowled Australia in that first test match at Rawalpindi, where Australia only took 4 wickets for the test match. Pakistan were able to take all 10 and pretty much out-bowled Australia in that first test, as I mentioned before. But after that first test match, they found it a bit tough on these flat surfaces, as Australia were batting well and were able to score runs on these flat surfaces, and the Pakistan bowlers didn't really threaten them at times throughout the whole series. Also with Pakistan throughout this series, to me, it seemed like they were a bit impatient at times. I noticed that some of the bowlers were a bit impatient, obviously wanting to take wickets every ball and not really working to a plan or trying to build pressure with dot balls and maidens. Pakistan sort of lacked that throughout the whole series, where the pitches were flat, nothing was happening, and they sort of were a bit impatient throughout this series. That's what I saw from the Pakistan bowlers at times. Also, the negative tactics that Pakistan employed in this series, especially in the second test, where they bowled that leg stump line outside the leg stump, especially when the spinners were on, Norman Ali and Sajid Khan, as a bit of a way to slow the run rate and stop Australia from scoring in that second test. I can understand why they did it, but it was a bit controversial. Some people didn't like those tactics, and to me, they needed to be a bit more positive with the ball, especially in that second test where they bowled those negative tactics. I thought they needed to be a bit more positive. You need to look to take wickets, not be negative with the ball. You should be always positive with the ball. And unfortunately, they weren't. The tactic did work. They did slow the runs down. But I just felt like bowling that negative line outside leg stump, it didn't really help them to take wickets in that first innings of the second test at Karachi, because Australia were able to get over 500. And Pakistan, they needed to take wickets. They needed to take wickets, especially when they lost the toss. Bowling first, you can't be negative on day one of a test match. And that's what happened there. So I was a bit surprised when they employed those tactics with the ball. Also, their spinners weren't threatening as well in the series. Norman Ali and Sajid Khan went for a lot of runs. I know Norman Ali took that 6-wicket haul in the first test of Rawalpindi, but after that, he didn't really do much. He went for runs. He wasn't threatening. Same with Sajid Khan. He went for a lot of runs in the series. Both of them didn't really look threatening to the Australian batsmen. The Australian batsmen were unfazed by them, and they weren't really scared of them. And the Australian batsmen were able to be aggressive towards the spinners and really take them downtown and be aggressive and score runs off them, and that's what happened. So Norman Ali and Sajid Khan didn't really apply pressure to the Australian batsmen with the spin. Obviously, we know in Pakistan it's not really known for spin, it's more known for pace. Spin doesn't play a big part in Pakistan like in Sri Lanka or India, for example. So definitely the spinners had their work cut out for them in this series. So the Australian batsmen didn't look threatened at all by the spinners. The seamers, the fast bowlers, Shaheen Afridi, Naseem Shah, Fahim Ashraf and Hassan Ali, I thought they did okay in this series. Shaheen Afridi bowled well at times. The last test at Lahore, he bowled pretty well. He took 4 wickets in the first innings, which were his best figures in the series. He bowled well with Shah in partnership in that last innings of the third test match. At times, he seemed a bit impatient and wanted to bowl the glory ball every ball and get a wicket every single ball. I noticed that throughout the whole series, that Afridi at times was trying a bit too hard. So maybe for him, he just needs to be a bit more patient and just work to a plan. Obviously, when the ball was reversing, he tried a bit too much and tried to bowl those full reverse swinging Yorkers every time. He just needed to be a bit more patient, I thought, in the series. But to take 9 wickets in the series was a pretty good effort from him. Obviously, Naseem Shah, I thought he bowled pretty well in the final test of the series. He showed his skills in the first innings where he took 4 wickets when the ball was starting to reverse. He caused some problems to the Australian batsmen in that first innings. He has the talent and the skills and could have a very successful test career for Pakistan. So great signs to see. He took 6 wickets in the series, best of 458. He's got a long way to go in his career, Naseem Shah, but what we saw in that last test, he's got a lot of potential and skills, and hopefully he can be one of Pakistan's best bowlers in test cricket. He's got a long future ahead of him, so great signs to see him do well. I believe he's only 19 years old, so he's got a long way to go, but it was good to see him bowl well. I mentioned Fahim Ashraf. He only played the 1 test. That was the second test at Karachi. Took 2 wickets in the first innings. He bowled okay, but he just played the 1 test match. So that's all he did in this series. Nothing much to add on to that. Hassan Ali, he took 2 wickets from 2 test matches. Wasn't quite at his best, I don't think, with the ball in this series. He looked a bit down in pace and didn't really quite look threatening as well. He bowled some good deliveries at times, but, he wasn't quite at his best. I mentioned the spinners before, Norman Ali and Sajid Khan. We'll talk about Numan Ali, I should say. Didn't manage to have a major impact with the ball in this series. As I said before, he took that 6-wicket haul in the first test, but after that, he didn't really do much. And the Australian batsmen really played him well. He wasn't really threatening, as we know, in Pakistan with the spin. It doesn't turn as much. He leaked runs. He didn't sustain pressure, didn't keep pressure on the Australian batsmen, didn't really challenge them. So he had a tough time of it in the series. Same with Sajid Khan. The same things I'll say about Sajid Khan, just like I did with Norman Ali, I should say, really didn't have a major part to play in the series. He only took 4 wickets. He went for a lot of runs, didn't sustain pressure, didn't look threatening with the ball, and leaked too many runs. And the Australian batsmen were able to be aggressive towards him and Norman Ali to score runs off them and really feel comfortable against them. So they didn't really have a big part to play in the series. But overall, I thought Pakistan's bowlers did an okay job. They were able to take wickets on these flat surfaces. And obviously, with the surfaces being flat, it probably didn't help them, because definitely their bowlers can definitely take more wickets than they did in this series. They can definitely take more wickets, but the wickets didn't really help them because they were flat and pretty good for batting. So that didn't really help them in the long term in this series. So I thought they did an okay job. They'll be quite happy that they took wickets and they were able to find ways to take wickets. Overall, I think Pakistan will be happy in the way they batted and bowled in the series at times, but they will be disappointed that they lost the series and they had those batting collapses towards the end of the series, especially in the last test where they lost the series 1-0. So they'll be disappointed to lose the series, Pakistan, but I don't think they should be disappointed. I think they should be proud of their efforts. They fought hard with both the bat and the ball. We saw some very good batting from them. And we also saw some good bowling from them at times in the series. Unfortunately, it wasn't meant to be for them to win the series. Australia played well and deserved their series win in the last test at Lahore. But for Pakistan, they should be proud of playing cricket back in Pakistan. Obviously, it's great to see cricket back in Pakistan after so many years, especially Pakistan and Australia playing in Pakistan. They should be proud of that, Pakistan, and their fans should be proud that they played Australia in Pakistan, and hopefully we see many more matches of cricket in Pakistan, and let's hope cricket grows and develops in Pakistan into the future. But overall, I thought Pakistan did okay. They'll be disappointed, as I mentioned before, but they should be happy and they should be proud of their efforts in this series. Let's have a look at Australia's performance with both bat and ball in this test series and talk about their performance in this test series. Let's have a look at their batting stats from the series. Khawaja, 496 runs. Steve Smith, 226. Carey, 179. Labuschagne, 170. Warner, 169. Green, 155. And Head, 68. That's how the Australian batsmen went about things in this test series against Pakistan. It was a good test series for Australia, winning the series 1-0 and winning their first series in Pakistan since 1998. Also, it's their first test series win in Asia since 2011 when they won against Sri Lanka 1-0, the last time they won a test series in Asia, in the subcontinent. Australia, they have now 13 test series wins in Asia, including this one against Pakistan. Hopefully they can add to that number when they tour Sri Lanka and India. This series win in Pakistan will boost their confidence heading into the next test series against Sri Lanka later on in the year and against India early next year. So I thought it was a pretty good series from the Australian batsmen and the team overall. But let's talk about their batting. There's plenty of positives to talk about the batting with Australia in this series. This is by far Australia's best batting performance in the subcontinent for some time. Australia were able to bat for long periods of time and score big totals in this series because the pitches in this test series were pretty flat in Pakistan. And Australia hasn't done that a lot in Test cricket of late, and especially in the subcontinent, batting for long periods of time. In the first Test match, they made 459 runs, and they batted for over 140.1 overs. In the second Test match, they were able to get 9 for 556 declared, and they batted over 189 overs. And in the third Test match of the series, they made 391, which they batted for 133.3 overs, and 3 for 227 declared. They batted over 60 overs. So the time they spent in the middle throughout this whole series, Australia, will serve them well for the Test series ahead against Sri Lanka and also against India. And you need to bat for long periods of time in Test match cricket, obviously to get those big scores in the first innings, but it's very important to do that in the subcontinent. And Australia, they did that in this Test series, and they were able to bat for long periods of time and post big scores on the board. Given how the pitches were pretty good for batting, pretty flat, they were able to cash in and get those big totals, which put them in some good positions in this series. Definitely in the second Test match, where they made over 556. That put them in a good position batting first. In that Test match, unfortunately, they couldn't finish off the job. In the third Test match, batting first, winning the toss, batting first, 391 was a pretty good score, and they were able to win the Test match and win the series 1-0. So that time spent in the middle, batting for long periods of time, will serve them well for the Sri Lanka tour and also for the India tour coming up in the subcontinent. And that's what you need to do. And Australia ticked that box in this series, and they were able to do that. So that's a positive. Also, Australia were able to build big partnerships throughout the series. And some of the partnerships they had in this series were 159 for the third wicket between Khawaja and Smith. That was in the second Test match in Karachi. 156 for the first wicket between Khawaja and Smith. That was in the first Test at Rawalpindi. 138 for the third wicket between Khawaja and Smith. That was the third Test at Lahore. 135 for the sixth wicket between Green and Carey. That was the third Test at Lahore. 108 for the third wicket between Labuschagne and Smith. That was in the first Test at Rawalpindi. 98 for the eighth wicket between Carey and Stark. That was in the second Test match at Karachi. 96 for the first wicket between Khawaja and Warner. That was in the second Test at Karachi. 82 for the first wicket between Warner and Khawaja. That was in the second Test at Karachi. 81 for the fifth wicket between Smith and Green. That was in the first Test at Rawalpindi. 77 for the second wicket between Khawaja and Labuschagne. That was in the second Test at Karachi. 65 for the second wicket between Khawaja and Labuschagne. That was at the second Test match at Karachi. 55 for the third wicket between Khawaja and Smith. That was the second Test at Karachi. 54 for the fourth wicket between Khawaja and Lyon. That was at Karachi in the second Test. And 51 unbeaten for the 10th wicket between Cummins and Swepson. That was in the second Test at Karachi. So Australia, throughout this series, built their partnerships, and they were very substantial partnerships. Overall, they had 500-run partnerships, and 9 of them were 50-run partnerships. So that's a good conversion rate there. Converting 50-run partnerships into 100-run partnerships in big partnerships. That's a good sign for Australia, and that shows that the wickets were pretty good for batting throughout this whole series, as we know. But it shows that the Australian batsmen are spending time in the middle and building those big partnerships, which Australia has lacked in Test cricket for some time, and especially in the subcontinent. So that's very good signs for Australia that they're batting for long periods of time, as we mentioned before, posting big totals. Obviously, it helps when you win the toss and bat first in the subcontinent, and you've got to bat big, and Australia did that on a few occasions and made it count. But also them spending time in the middle, building the big partnerships, that will put them in good stead for Sri Lanka and India to come, and make the batsmen feel like they know how to play in these conditions. Obviously, familiarise yourself with these conditions, which are so foreign to Australian cricketers, not used to these conditions in Pakistan. And that was the big question coming into Pakistan, is that how will Australia go on these pitches? Well, they went pretty well, actually, because it was pretty much a batting-dominated series because the pitches were so flat, and they didn't really offer much until the last two Test matches had a bit of something in the wicket, whereas in the first Test, not really much at Rawalpindi. So Australia should be happy with their batting effort in this series, and there's a lot of positive signs there going forward. I thought Australia's playing against the spinners, I thought they played the spin pretty well in this series, As we know, Australia have struggled and had their problems against spin in recent years in the subcontinent. But in this series, they handled the spin pretty well. The wickets in Pakistan don't spin as much as they do in Sri Lanka and India. So that will be a different challenge for Australia when they go to Sri Lanka and India. The pitch is going to turn a lot more. But here in Pakistan, where the spin doesn't come into the game as much, I thought they had a good plan against the Pakistan spinners in Sajid Khan and Norman Ali, who didn't really look threatening in this series because spin wasn't a big part of the series. But they were able to have clear plans towards them and how they were going to play the spin. The Australian batsmen had a clear plan, as I said, against the Pakistan spinners. They played the sweep shot, the reverse sweep, the paddle sweep. They were playing all those sorts of shots to try and score runs and get off strike. And they did that quite well, actually. Usman Khawaja, Alex Carey, to name a couple, played the shot really well, played the sweep and reverse sweep and paddle very well. Steve Smith at times played the sweep shots as well. And also Marnus Labuschagne did as well. So clear plan there from the Australians in terms of going about it against spin. They were using their feet, going down to the pitch to get to the pitch of the ball, being aggressive to the Pakistan spinners as well. So good signs to see Australia handle the spin well in this series. That was a big question mark going into the series, how they were going to handle the conditions in Pakistan in terms of the spin. Obviously, as we know in Pakistan, the spin doesn't play a big part in the series. So I thought they had clear plans, and that's good signs, especially going forward to Sri Lanka and India, where the spin will be more of a challenge for Australia because the ball does turn a lot more in Sri Lanka, but also more so in India. But it's pleasing to see that they have a clear plan against the spin, and that will put them in good stead when they go to Sri Lanka and India. So that's pretty good there. Also, with Australia's batting, the one area that you'll have to say they lacked in their batting in this series was not converting the starts into centuries. Now, with this series being dominated by the bat, Australia only had one centurion, and he scored 2 centuries, and no surprise, it's Usman Khawaja. He's the only one who scored a century on this tour. The rest didn't. And that is a bit of concern. It's very important for those batsmen who got starts, like Smith, Carey, Labuschagne, Warner and Green, and Travis Head missed out. He didn't really have much of an impact in the series. But for those batsmen I just mentioned before, they had starts. They got in, they got set, but they got out. And it's very important for Australia going forward to Sri Lanka and India. It's very important for the top order to contribute, and one of them or two of them in the top order to score a big century. Now, Usman Khawaja did that in the first innings of the second test where he got the 160 in Karachi. He was the one who got that big century. But you want to see that more from the other Australian batsmen. Obviously, we know Steve Smith's not at his best. He's still trying to find his feet. He's not at his dominant best, as we all know. He had a few starts. Alex Carey got that 93 in Karachi. He got the 50 in the last test match at Lahore. Couldn't convert those into centuries. Marnus Labuschagne got that 90 in the first test match. Couldn't convert that into a century. David Warner got a couple of 50s. Couldn't convert into a century. Cameron Green was approaching his first century. Got out for 79 in the last test match at Lahore. So for Australia, the only thing I'll say about their batting is that they need to convert those starts. It's very important for Australia going forward to Sri Lanka and India. You've got to convert the starts into big hundreds because you need everyone contributing. And that was only the one negative I found in their batting in this series, is that the batsmen didn't convert starts on these flat surfaces in Pakistan, because all 3 pitches in this series were pretty good for batting. And it's disappointing that only one batsman got 2 centuries, and that was Khawaja. Obviously, Usman Khawaja is in a different league of form to everyone else in this Australian team, and without Khawaja, Australia would have struggled in the series. So that's something that Australia needs to work on going forward to Sri Lanka and India. Let's talk about the batsmen individually and my thoughts on how they perform. We'll start with Usman Khawaja. What a series he had. By far Australia's best batsman in this series. 496 runs, average of 165, 2 centuries and 2 50s, best of 160. He made it look so easy, didn't he? It isn't easy, but he batted superbly. Scores of 97, 160, 44 not out, 91, 104 not out. 2 centuries in the series. He could have easily had 5 centuries in the series if he converted 2 of those 90 scores that he had and that 44 not out in the second test. He would have easily had 5 centuries. He was just such in good form. So what a series from Khawaja. What a story for him to come back to Pakistan and did what he did. Was an amazing story. So he was a standout player for Australia in this series, Usman Khawaja. David Warner, he had an okay series with the bat. He wasn't at his absolute best, but he contributed with the bat when needed. He got a couple of 50s and really played his part for this Australian team. And also his opening partnership with Khawaja was a good opening partnership for Australia to get them off to a good start and set the foundation. So I thought David Warner had an okay series. Marnus Labuschagne, I thought he had an okay series as well. Wasn't quite at his best. 170 runs for an average of 34, 150 and 2 ducks, which is surprising. It's not every day that Marnus Labuschagne gets out for a duck. He got out for 2 ducks. Obviously, one of them was a run out in the second test at Karachi where he ran himself out for a duck. But besides from that, I thought Pakistan bowled well to him. And for Marnus, it wasn't a dominant series from him, but at least he got the experience of playing in the subcontinent and understanding what he needs to do in these conditions. So I thought he had an okay series. Steve Smith, I thought he had an okay series with the bat. Not at his absolute best, obviously. Steve Smith's not quite at his best yet like he was 4 or 5 years ago. But I thought he had an okay time with the bat in this series. Obviously, he had a terrible time of it in the slips. He dropped a few catches in the slip cordon, which is very unusual from Steve Smith. He's got a safe pair of hands, but in this series, wasn't quite at his best with the slip catching. Didn't quite get the century in the series. He had a few starts, 78, 72, 59. He didn't convert 3 of them into centuries. He'll be disappointed about that. He has very high standards. So I thought he had an okay series. Travis Head, I thought he was the only Australian batsman that really missed out in this series. 68 runs, average of 22, highest score of 26 is not good enough, especially on these flat surfaces where it's very good for batting. He didn't quite cash in. So, yeah, disappointing for Travis Head. Let's hope he can get some runs in Sri Lanka. And hopefully he needs to contribute because scores of 8, 23 and 26 and 11 not out are not going to cut it in the subcontinent. So he needs to improve there. Cameron Green, I thought he was impressive, Cameron Green, in this series with both bat and ball, but we'll talk about his batting. First tour to the subcontinent, he struggled early on in the series, but after the first test, he looked settled and getting used to the conditions. And Green played a big part in this series, being the all-rounder. He'll be vitally important when Australia go to Sri Lanka and India, obviously to bowl his overs if Australia go with a 2-spinner attack, like they did in this test match for the last 2 test matches when they picked Lyon and Swepson. So I thought Cameron Green had a good series. And last but not least, Alex Carey. I thought Carey kept well and he batted well in this series. There was a lot of pressure on Alex Carey before the start of this series about his spot in the side. I think he's justified his selection and why the selectors chose him in this Australian side. When he scored that 93 in Karachi, I think that was the standout innings for him. He needed a breakout innings. He didn't quite get the century. He was disappointed he didn't get the 3 figures. But I thought that 93 was so important for him, not only for him and the series and for Australia, but his confidence in Test cricket. And then he backed it up with a 67 in the last test at Lahore. So positive signs there for Alex Carey. I hope he can continue riding this momentum, because if he can get the odd 50 or the odd century and average around about mid-30s for Australia as the wicketkeeper, then he's doing his job. So I thought he had a great series with the bat, especially in the last 2 test matches, and he also had a good time of it behind the stumps. He kept well to the spinners and the quicks. Not easy in the subcontinent keeping, but I thought he did a very good job. So overall, I thought the Australian batsman did a very good job. We didn't see any major batting collapses like we see from Australia in recent times in the subcontinent. I thought it was a very good, solid batting performance. There's a lot of areas to improve on, of course, but there's a lot of positives to take out of this batting performance for Australia, and hopefully they can continue this momentum heading into Sri Lanka and India. But overall, I was quite pleased with the batting performance from Australia in this test series. Let's have a look at the Australian bowlers and their performance in this series. Cummins took 12 wickets, Lyon 12, Stark 8, Green 3, Swepson 2, Labuschagne 1, and Hazelwood, no wickets. That's how the Australian bowlers went about things in this Test series against Pakistan. The Australian bowlers found it tough throughout this series, given how flat the pitches were, but they found a way to take wickets. They found it tough on a flat pitch at Rawalpindi when they only took 3 wickets. One of them was a run-out. They took 4 wickets in that innings, in the first innings at Rawalpindi, but one of the wickets was a run-out. That was Marnus Labuschagne running out Babar Azam. So technically, they took 3 wickets in that first innings and found it tough on a very flat surface at Rawalpindi. And it looked like it was going to be a long series for the Australian bowlers. But after that, they were able to adjust and find ways to take wickets on these flat surfaces. Definitely reverse swing helped. Certainly helped Australia, obviously in the second and third Test matches where Stark and Cummins got the ball to reverse. That was a big bonus for Australia to take wickets on these flat surfaces in Pakistan. Also, Nathan Lyon had a very tough time of it in the spin department. He bowled a lot of overs, but he was able to pick out a few wickets as well and contribute. Cameron Green, as the all-rounder, picked up a few wickets as well. Mitchell Swepson on debut picked up a couple. And Labuschagne, some overs of part-time spin. He was able to take 1 wicket. And obviously Josh Hazelwood didn't play a big part in the series. He only played 1 test and didn't take any wickets. But I thought the Australian bowlers, after Rawalpindi, everyone thought, well, we can't take wickets in the subcontinent. We're going to struggle. But I liked what Australia did after that first test. They were able to familiarise themselves with the conditions. Obviously, for the Australian bowlers and the Australian team, it's the first time they've played in Pakistan. So they're not quite used to these foreign conditions and didn't expect the pitch to be that flat at Rawalpindi. And they were able to find ways and find other ways of taking wickets. Obviously, reverse swing was a major factor, as I said before, especially in the second Test match at Karachi when Pakistan were bowled out for 148. Mitchell Stark was able to get the ball reversing and take 3 wickets in that first innings and cause a Pakistan batting collapse, which put Australia in a good position in that Test match up until the last innings where they couldn't finish off the job. And also in the third Test match, Stark and obviously Cummins was able to get the ball reversing. Brilliant spell of reverse swing bowling from the pair of them. He took 9 wickets between them. Obviously, Cummins took 5 and Stark took 4 in that spell to really put Pakistan on the back foot. So Australia found ways to take wickets and to adapt to the conditions, which I thought was good from the Australian team. And obviously for Australia, going forward to India and Sri Lanka in particular, reverse swing's going to play a big part for them. So it's good signs that Australia got the ball to reverse in this series. So that will be good for them going forward to Sri Lanka and India, where the ball does reverse on those abrasive surfaces, and that will definitely play a big part along with the spin when they tour Sri Lanka and India. So I thought the bowling from Australia was pretty good. It was hard work for the bowlers on both sides, given how flat the surfaces were, but I thought they fought hard and they were able to take wickets when needed. Let's go through some of the bowlers' performances in this series. We'll start with Pat Cummins, the captain. I thought he bowled well and led well as a captain. Obviously bowled brilliantly in the third test in the first innings. It was a wonderful display of fast bowling and reverse swing when he and Stark caused Pakistan to have a batting collapse of 7 for 20, which swung the test match in favour of Australia. So I thought he bowled well. He led from the front, Pat Cummins. Every time Australia needed to break a partnership, he was always the one to get the ball and say, well, fellas, I'm going to get the ball now, and I'm going to go in there and try and get a few wickets and try and break it open. That's what he did throughout the whole series. And Pat Cummins has done that brilliantly since he's been captain. He's always been able to lead from the front, and that's what he did in this series. He did receive some criticism for his decisions in this test series. Obviously, not enforcing the follow-on in the second test, which cost Australia. Obviously, didn't quite finish off the job there, bowling Pakistan out. It was a brilliant innings from Pakistan. And also, he received a bit of criticism for declaring too early in the third test, setting Pakistan 351 to win. In the end, that was the right decision because Australia had enough time and they bowled Pakistan out for 232 to win the test match by 115 runs. So I thought he captained well in the series. It's a great start to his captaincy career. 2 series wins now. Obviously, the Ashes and now a series in Pakistan. He's started well in his captaincy career. So I thought Pat Cummins had a good series as captain, but also he had a good series with the ball. Mitchell Stark, I thought he bowled well at times in this series. He bowled well in the second and third test matches when the ball started to reverse. He was a handful. And also, Mitchell Starc's going to be a vital player in this Australian bowling lineup, especially in the subcontinent when they go to Sri Lanka and India when the ball starts to reverse. He keeps proving his critics wrong. Now, everyone has a go at Mitchell Starc because he's inconsistent and he doesn't get results. But, he keeps proving the critics wrong, and that's great to see from Mitchell Starc. He's a vital player in this Australian team, and Australia do need him in the subcontinent when the ball starts to reverse. And as we've seen in this series, he can be a handful. So good to see Mitchell Starc bowling well and getting the results. He got 8 wickets in this series, and that's not a bad result given how flat the pitches were in this series. So I thought he did an okay job. Nathan Lyon, I thought Nathan Lyon, he had a massive workload, obviously being the main spinner for Australia. He bowled a lot of overs in the series, 219 overs. Nathan Lyon bowled 1,314 balls out of his 219 overs, the third most for Australia in a 3-match test series. Obviously, he's up there with Richie Benaud and Shane Warne for the most balls bowled in a 3-match test series. Obviously, Richie Benaud's out in front, 1,344 balls against Pakistan in 1959. Then you have Nathan Lyon, of course. And then you have Shane Warne, who bowled 1,145 balls against South Africa in 1994. And then Shane Warne again, 1,123 balls against South Africa in 1997-98. And then obviously Shane Warne, 1,090 balls versus Pakistan in 1994. So it just shows how much work Nathan Lyon put in this series. And it was a large workload for him. He bowled well in the second test at Karachi, where he got those wickets late on day 5 to get Australia near to victory. But he did well in this last test match. Obviously, Lyon had a problem of not getting the job done in the 4th innings. A lot of people criticised him for not getting the job done. He got the job done in this last test match. He bowled well. He was consistent. He was challenging the Pakistan batsman. The ball did turn a bit. He got 5 for 83, and that was a wonderful achievement for him to get that 5 and it meant a lot for Nathan Lyon when he got that 5 because it just showed how much work and effort he put in this whole series, and he deserved that 5-wicket haul more than anyone else. And obviously he'll be a key part for Australia going forward to Sri Lanka and India, but he's a key bowler in this bowling lineup for Australia, Nathan Lyon, and he had a wonderful last test match to bowl Australia to victory. So I thought Nathan Lyon toiled hard, and he had a good series. Cameron Green, I thought he bowled well in the series. He played a big role in the series, obviously being the all-rounder, being the third quick. He handled that responsibility of being the third quick to Cummins and Starc quite well. I thought he relished the opportunity and the responsibility, and that's great to see from a young player. And he took wickets when needed, and he held up an end when required to dry up the runs, and he did that quite well throughout the series. So I think Cameron Green's going to be a very valuable asset for Australia going forward, not only in this series, but also in Sri Lanka and India. And I thought he had a good series with both bat and ball. Mitchell Swepson had a tough series. Obviously took 2 wickets in the first innings at Karachi, and then after that he struggled a bit. We've got to be patient with Mitch. It's only his start of his test career. He's only played 2 test matches. So I think it's very important for Australia to back him in for Sri Lanka and India. Given that the surfaces in Pakistan weren't conducive to spin, he'll get a lot more purchase and turn in Sri Lanka and India. So I think we need to give him a go in Sri Lanka and India, because if we drop him after this series, it won't do his confidence any good. So Australia do need to back him, and Pat Cummins said we do back him. So I think he'll be a part of Sri Lanka and India when Australia go there. So, there's a lot of potential there with Mitchell Swepson, but he's just got to work on certain areas. He's still developing as a cricketer, and hopefully he can improve and win games for Australia and take a 5-wicket haul if he can in his career. He's a very good bowler. But he's early on in his career, he's young, so let's just give him some time to develop and grow as a cricketer. And last but not least, Josh Hazlewood didn't play much of a part of this series. I was quite surprised that Josh didn't play 2 or at least all the test matches. He only played the 1 test at Rawalpindi. I thought he bowled okay in that test. Didn't take a wicket, but yeah, quite surprised that Josh Hazlewood didn't have much of a part in the series. But in saying that, overall, I thought Australia's bowling was pretty good in this series. They fought hard with both bat and ball. They should be proud of their efforts, and hopefully this bowling performance will boost their confidence going forward to Sri Lanka and India. Overall, I thought it was a good series win from Australia. I thought they did well with both bat and ball throughout the whole series. There's a lot of positives to take out of the series, and there's a lot of areas to learn and improve on. But this is great signs for Australia. This is their best performance by far in Asia, and hopefully they can win in Sri Lanka and India. And hopefully winning this series in Pakistan will boost their confidence going forward to Sri Lanka and India. Congratulations to Australia on winning the series 1-0. Their first series win in Pakistan since 1998, and their third Test series win in Pakistan overall. They deserved to win this series. They fought hard with both bat and ball, and they were rewarded for their hard work. Hopefully this series win in Pakistan will boost their confidence for their tours to Sri Lanka and India. Pakistan will be disappointed on losing the series, but they should be proud of their efforts in this series. This Test series was played in very good spirit by both teams, and even though Australia won the series, the true winner was the game of cricket itself and the people of Pakistan. It was great seeing cricket back in Pakistan, and hopefully we see many more matches in Pakistan in the future. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode. Be sure to subscribe and click the bell to get the latest episodes of the podcast, and like and share our Facebook page, and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Until next time, keep safe, and bye for now.